Ready, Jesse? All right. Good evening, everybody. It is 5 p.m. Excuse me. It's 4:59 p.m. on my clock. On October 10th, 2022, this is the Monday regular board meeting for the Monroe School District. Present are Directors Whitfield, Director Barnes, Director Johnson, and myself, Director Campbell. President Jennifer Bumpus is absent tonight from our meeting due to travel issue. Interim Superintendent Dr. Darcy Marson, executive staff and members of our staff, as well as members of the community, or one of our student directors, and I believe Nathan will be here a little bit later. I want to welcome to everybody to our meeting tonight. Members of the public can log into the regular board meeting using the Zoom link on the board docs website. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, welcome to tonight's meeting. We're happy to have you tonight. All comments during tonight's meeting are audio recorded and will be available online on our website. This is in addition to the written minutes. Please understand that while it may appear the board is moving quickly on important matters, there have been previous discussions on these issues either in earlier meetings or in board workshops, which are also open public meetings. Each director has had ample time to study the issues, ask appropriate questions, and obtain satisfactory answers from the superintendent, her staff, or through outside research. All right. Moving on, we need to go through and approve our review of the agenda and approve the agenda. Is there a motion to approve our agenda? I don't believe we have any adjustments from when it was posted, so it is as it stands. Is there a motion to approve our agenda today?
I move that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve today's agenda for Monday, October 10th as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on that? All in favor, please raise your hand. All right, motion passes 4-0. Moving on, reports, student representatives, and Nathan just flew in at just the right time. You must have been running fast. I'll let you catch your breath while you get set up, and we'll start with Laura, our newest student director. Is there anything that you have for us tonight?
Okay, there's actually a lot going on at Sky Valley right now. We have a lot of clubs. Some of the clubs we have going on are fiber arts and trail running, but there's usually clubs going all day, every day. In a few weeks, the Reptile Man is coming to our school, which is super exciting. I'm super excited for that. And then STEM and ESS both just came back from a 3-day trip to Mount St. Helens, which is super cool. Yeah. So.
Do you guys have any questions for Laura?
Just excited to see you here. Thank you. And thanks for the report. And I saw some of the pictures from Mount St. Helens and it looked awesome.
All right, up at the high school, we've got a lot going on as well. In the senior field of things, we've got a lot of people applying for colleges right now, which is really exciting. And recently, Mr. Giles, my English teacher, Giles is actually his first name, Giles Stanton, that's what we call him, gave a big presentation to a lot of juniors and seniors regarding how to apply to college, all the ins and outs of that. Apparently, he knows a thing or two about it. And so a lot of stress relief there. Just lots of people working hard to expand their education. And as along with that, we've got a lot of teachers who are working with Mr. Giles to counsel students one-on-one meetings to help them work along with their essays, applications, etc., to just get them moving, which is super helpful. Additionally, this past week was homecoming, and in preparation to that, the Link crew put on games and food, candy, I guess, there were a whole bunch of freshmen. All the freshmen do come and hang out during lunch, and I wasn't there because I'm not a freshman. But I hear it was fun. And additionally, homecoming went well. I call it a success. Things are going great. Thank you. Any questions?
I have a question. My family was sick, so I wasn't able to make it to the football game on Friday night, but I'm wondering how we did. I've tried to look it up, but I
You
couldn't
have
find
to
it anywhere.
ask. Yeah, we something about 62 to 8 or something. Something like that.
Wow,
Yeah, so
that's
really
awesome.
good. I'm pretty sure we won. And then with that, thank you for reminding me. Band and homecoming choir, cheer, all put on great shows during that, and it was awesome. And outside of school, in the addition to the classroom education field of things, sports are going great and are approaching their end of their seasons. So good stuff.
Any other questions?
Awesome.
All right, thank you guys.
Hang on, I'll just make a quick comment. I really appreciate the report on what's being done to help students apply for college and the steps that our faculty are taking to walk them through that process. That is something that is so invaluable, and to see faculty stepping forward to do that and to fill that need, it's just amazing. So kudos to the faculty that have stepped up to do that. You are so appreciated.
Yeah, it's something that's passionate for me. When I was a high school teacher, we would do that. We'd always say, apply before Halloween. That was like the thing. And I think that it's important too. As my wife and I are first generation college students in our family, I had no clue what I was walking into. And I know that we have a lot of students that may walk in through that. And so to help set them up, and not just for college, but whatever, if they go to into voc tech or whatever it is, to set them up for that and give them ahead of time, that gives them a great edge on that. So that's awesome. And scholarships. All right. Moving on then, we're on to audience public comments. Are there any public comments? Okay, all right. Moving on from public comments, we're going to move into item 4.01, Part 1, General SBA and WCAS. Our Director of Learning and Teaching, Kim Whitworth, and her team. We've had a presentation for us, right, Kim?
Hey, everybody. Kim Whitworth, Jennifer Murphy, and Chris Cronus. We are going to be doing some unpacking of our SBA scores. And this is part 1 of a 3-part series that we're going to do to try to walk you through maybe a cycle of inquiry, if you will. So we're starting with our data, which is the General Smarter Balanced Assessment, which is SBA, and the Washington Comprehensive Assessment of Science Outcomes. And so we're going to look at that data. Part 2 is going to be on October 24th, and that is the tiered supports for student learning. So what are we doing as a result of that data? The data tells us something. It identifies problems of practice. It gives us an area to focus on things we're doing well as things that we need to work on. And then part 3 is going to be in November, and that is, what is the professional learning that our staff needs to meet the needs of the students, and specifically the students that we've identified as needing extra support. Monroe commitments. We're going to continue to try to weave these into all of our presentations and to the work that we do. We pay attention to powerful instruction. What is best practice in terms of instruction? Equitable access. What are we looking at in terms of how well our students are doing? And if they're not doing well, why not? And trying to figure out what are the barriers to learning that we need to identify and mitigate. And high expectations. We know that having high expectations for our students is really important. They will rise to the occasion, and so we need to make sure that we are doing our best for them, and we're providing them with some rigorous learning. Slide 3. So I think I've talked with some of you about this, and this has to do with assessments. There are 2 types of assessments that we look at in education. One is a formative assessment, and the other is a summative assessment. And formative is what you can still use to change your teaching practice, to do an intervention. It gives students feedback on what they're doing and ways that they can improve and different things that they need to learn to be successful. So that's the formative. You have an assessment, you have time, and there's something that you can do with that data. Summative assessment is at the end of all of that, where did a student finally land? An analogy that I think appreciate, I'm not sure I like it, I appreciate is formative assessments, like in health, is a checkup. You go to the doctor, you get some assessments done, they give you that data, and you make some changes in your lifestyle or things that you need to do. A summative assessment is more like an autopsy. They're done. There's not much more you're going to be able to do. That's a kind of an easy way to remember formative and summative assessments. Let's see. So if we're starting, I'm sorry, let's go back to that other one really quick. So here are kind of just in general 4 different assessments that we have. The first is every single day, teachers are assessing students. They're looking at the work they're doing exit tickets, they're asking questions. So they're teaching something, and every day they're assessing how well you did. That assessment is then used to provide interventions, it's to reteach, it's to help the individuals who might need it. The next one is a common formative assessment. And this is where, like our professional learning communities, those group of teachers who teach a common subject will identify their essential standards. And that means 100% students are going to learn this no matter what. It's really important, and it's so important, we're going to make sure you all learn it. They give an assessment, and then together they collaboratively identify what are the next steps. What are they going to do next, and what are students going to do next? Interim benchmarks are kind of the next level of assessment, and these are given 2 or 3 times a year. It's a nice way for us to review program. It's a nice way for us to stop and say, okay, this is what we're doing well, we're going to continue going. Or it says, wait, hold on, something's not quite right, you need to look at this a little bit further. And so iReady is one, and we also have some other assessments that use the benchmark assessment system. The final assessment that we have is the SBA, and that's kind of, again, that last ultimate assessment that we give that we just, not much we can do about it, but it does provide us information that we can use. It does give us a way to compare to other schools in our district, in our state, and in our country. We can look at districts and schools that have similar demographics and figure out what they're doing, if they're doing some great things, and that's another way that we can use the SBA. Next, I'm going to hand this over to Jennifer Murphy, and she's going to talk about our SBA results, which you had a chance to see June 27th, but it was really brief. And she's going to explain maybe what's happened since June and a little bit more detail on that.
Okay, so there's not a lot of big changes since June. When I looked at the numbers that Niall prepared for all of you back in June, there was like 1 or 2 percentage point difference. And that's just because as late scores come in or they refine the scores a little bit more, there was a slight change. But this should look really similar to what you saw in June. The blue is students who performed above standard. Green is students who are at least at standard. Yellow is approaching the standard. And red is students who are below the standard. You'll see a little bit of gray when you look at these, and that's just students who either didn't take the assessment or didn't have a score associated with the assessment. So in general, when we look at it in elementary, about 49% of our students are proficient in language arts. In middle school, about 48%. And then in high school, we jump up to about 62%. And then in math, it's a little bit less. You can see that we're a little bit stronger in ELA. In math, elementary, we're still holding around 43%, but it drops down significantly in middle school. Only about 29% of students are proficient in math, and in grade 10, only 25%. Of our students. And then science is actually the final slide, and that has a little bit more of a celebration. We get up to 52% in grade 5 are proficient in science, 35% in grade 8, and then 53% in grade 10.
We know that there's a lot of improvement to be had in these scores. You're going to see in some later slides kind of how this breaks down in terms of demographic, and Chris is going to talk a little bit more about that. But in general, we're seeing scores that are probably a little bit less than the average for our state, and they've dropped a little bit since COVID. Yeah. I'm going to talk to you about our celebration.
Yeah, so there is some to celebrate about. There's some, and one of the things that we've seen is that our elementary schools are really doing a great job. Third grade, if you look at the bottom of that slide there, grade 3 across the board, it's higher than the state average. So it's still not where we want it to be by any stretch, but there is something to celebrate there, especially given the last couple of years. It's been a heck of a ride for everybody. So. And then if you look at the comparatives on the top section there from 21-22 versus 2021, there's a pretty significant bump, especially in math. So while the scores you saw are definitely lower than where we want them to be, or where they should be, there's still some growth that we're seeing, and that's encouraging. And one of the reasons why it's so encouraging, especially with math, is that our math rollout was completely interrupted by COVID. So we bought the curriculum, but we never had time to teach the teachers how to use it. And we're still seeing some of the growth that we're seeing, which is a really healthy thing. We know we have a lot more work to do with our teachers and supporting them in their adoption of the curriculum. And that's going to take some time, especially given the constraints of the last 2 years and the impact that's had on our students and our staff. But there is something to celebrate here. So. And then we look at specific schools too. Salem Woods is doing a terrific job. There's some work to be done, and I'll go into that in a little bit around special education. But their general ed scores are considerably higher than that of the state average. In particular, we want to celebrate Frank Wagner's third grade team. Almost a 12 percentage point bump from pre-COVID numbers. Hidden River, again, almost 6 points higher than the state in ELA. And excuse me, Chain Link as well has had some good growth. Yes, Nathan.
In those grade levels, is that counting from last year's 6th graders up to 7th grade, or 7th graders of last year compared to 7th graders this year?
That's a great question. Good question. So we can't actually, we're having a really hard time comparing what you're referring to as cohort data. So for example, if you've got a 6th grader who you tested last year, moving into 7th grade and looking at those test scores together, that's a cohort. We can't actually compare cohorts because of COVID. We had a 2-year interruption of really good data. So even if we try to, it makes it difficult because the spring SBA from last school year was actually done last fall, right? Or the previous school year was done last fall. So we did SBA twice last year, in the fall and then in the spring. So our cohort data is really messy. So these are just one-offs. That's actually one of the reasons why we had for the Frank Wagner score up there, the percentage increase from 2018-19, because that's the last time we had good data to compare that group of students to. So they're different cohorts we're comparing. Excellent question. And please, if you have any questions, jump in anytime. Okay. So there we go. So one of the things that we tend to do and try to do to really isolate what we need to grow around, and really also what we want to celebrate, is disaggregate the data as best we can by different groups. In this case, disaggregated by ethnicity. And one of the things you'll notice by taking a look at that is essentially the gaps that we see among our students of color when compared with their white peers are pretty profound most of the time here, especially when you consider maybe in the one case that they're Hispanic Latino. That's a profound gap of 30 points in ELA, and that is a major area of growth for us. One of the things that we need to account for when we look at these scores is we can't assume that the students who we're serving that fall into one of these categories, for example, is limited by their English proficiency, for example. So we're counting all Hispanic Latino students, some of whom were born English speakers, but we're still not meeting their needs according to this data. The same could be said for our American Indian, Alaskan Native students, especially in areas of math, our Black and African American kids. While the sample size is small, it doesn't matter. There are students and we need to meet their needs. And there's still a lot of growth there that we have to do. Any questions? Okay. Oh,
Wait, here we go. I just wanted you to explain what suppressed means.
oh
So
yeah.
that folks listening
Thank
in
you
know.
very much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
So when you have a sample size, the actual N size, the number of individuals in this case who took this assessment, when the N size is too small, they suppress the number altogether. So while they're 33% and 20% respectively in ELA and math, the total number of students who actually took the test is so small when comparing it to a larger data set, it's kind of an unfair comparison. We still provided the data because we are provided with the data. So we wanted to make sure that we're being transparent about that. Yeah. If for those who didn't hear it, Kim just said it's usually less than 10. All right. Thank you for the question. All right. So when we disaggregate by MLL, we separated this graph into two sections. So the top part is the state averages and the bottom is us. So you'll notice that we actually fall in line, although we're underperforming slightly when compared to the state. So the issue we're having around the outcomes for students who speak multiple languages, it's the same. We have the same issues that every other district in the state of Washington has. There are a handful of districts that have been more successful. We're looking at their practices. We're looking at schools that have been more successful in their practices and trying to implement some of the strategies and work that they're doing to our own work as well. We're going to go into that more next week or next time we meet. The same can be said for the students with disabilities. You notice we're hovering right around the state averages there as well. We're performing slightly better in math, but that's not a trend. That's just a one-off data point there. You disaggregate by income level. Again, we might align with the state, but there's a lot of work to be done there. Essentially, if you're a low-income student in the state of Washington and here in Monroe, you're going to have a heck of a harder time accessing the learning and being successful. So that means we need to make some changes to how we're serving students. Hand this one over back to Jen.
So once we kind of did that for the SBAC and ELA and math, we realized that it would be probably helpful to all of you to have the disaggregated data for science. And, you know, there's no real big surprises here. The numbers are really similar to what you saw in the other slides. But again, I think the gap's a little bit smaller when it comes to science. We're doing a little bit better for more students, but we still have a lot of work to do. This is just related to ethnicity. And then the next slide looks at our students who are in particular categories, our multilingual learners, our students enrolled in special education, and our students who are impacted by their income level. And you can see the gap across the board is pretty staggering. And like Chris said, we're going to talk to you more next week about what are the things that we're doing in response to this and how are we mitigating these barriers for our students so that over time we can see these numbers improve.
So this is going to be just a little bit of a preview for the next time that we meet. One of the things that we used to do is we would say, if everybody is using best practices, if we're using the best teaching practices and assessment practices and all of that, we're going to reach all of our kids. It didn't pan out. So one of the things that we're doing is something called targeted universalism. We, looking at our data, a problem of student learning that we identified is our multilingual learners. And I think that's something that you've heard us talking about for the past few months, is like, this is a group of students that we know can do better, and we know that we can do better for. So we're concentrating on that. Our theory of action is if we focus on learning together and those collaborative structures, and we focus on CCDEI, those things, those strategies that we figure out will work for our MLL students will work for all students. So instead of saying, this is what we're doing and it's going to fit everybody, we're saying we're focusing on this group of students, and we're going to be looking at cycles of inquiry, and what works for them and what we implement for our multilingual learners is going to have benefits for every single one of our students. So on October 17th, what we're going to do is have some school leaders and some teacher leaders from our schools come in and talk about what is it that they're doing in their schools every single day to help meet the needs of our multilingual learners, and how are they looking at that impact on all of our students. So that's going to be part 2. Are there any questions?
Sure, always. So first I want to say I'm excited for part 2. I thank you for the preview, and I'm looking forward to focusing on goals. I think my first question is really basic, and I'm just hoping somebody can explain to me what grade level actually means. So I think a lot of folks, measure student success by test scores or by grades, and so I'm hoping you can give me an idea of what grade level means.
So I think that's going to be a combination of 2 things. One is if we're looking at Common Core, we're looking at a scope and sequence that starts at kindergarten and goes to 12th grade. So it's a little bit of a linear piece. Sometimes, especially for math, we know that you have to learn this before you learn this. You have to learn number theory before you can start doing fractions. Same thing with writing. You know that there are certain basic skills that you have to learn before you can write. So that's laid out for K-12. So there's a scope and sequence. Another thing that that curriculum developers and assessment developers will take into consideration is cognitive development. We know that kids probably are a little bit better at concrete sequential sorts of learning at their younger ages, and the more abstract happens later. So there's a combination of that scope and sequence. What are some foundational skills? And then there's also that lens of cognitive development and what is appropriate for a kindergartner versus a 5th grader versus a 9th grader versus a senior. Did that answer it?
It helps for sure.
Okay.
And then I think my only other question is, if all of the numbers were up really high, if they were in the 80s or 90s, what does that mean? Like, I'm just trying to get an understanding for how these percentages matter and what they actually look like for our students. So if they looked very different, I'm curious about what conversation we'd be having.
So I think we would still be looking at why are we not at 100%? Because we want all of our kids to be learning and working at high levels. I think when we're looking at things from 0% to about 80%, we're thinking about core instruction, what's happening in core instruction. And then from 80% and on, then we're starting to look at things like multi-tiered systems of support. So core instruction, what happens if kids are still not getting it? If we've got 80% and we still have that like last 20% that are not learning and not getting what we're teaching, then we start looking at tier 2 interventions and we start looking at tier 3 interventions. But up until about 80%, we believe that we should be able to meet the needs with really strong curriculum and assessment and instruction in our classrooms. And I think, again, it gets back to, we've tried to do everything and we've tried to focus on everything. So it's like, let's narrow it down and focus on a few students, a specific group of students. Let's learn from that. And as we're doing that, we know that what we put into place is going to impact all of our kids.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, Kim. The last thing I'll say is like a general comment in the goals. And I know I've said this before, we see the DEI, and we've added the CC to the DEI, and I would still love to see folks adding accessibility and adding that A to the end, because I feel like if we're not accessible, then it isn't culturally competent, it isn't diverse, it isn't equity focused, and it isn't inclusive.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
You know, you have a lot of group of teachers for different ages. And you guys have a lot of responsibility with the core classes. And this might be difficult to answer, but what would you tell your science teachers, your math teachers, and your English teachers? And understanding that there is ongoing testing. And the second part, which will probably include your answer, is the type of testing that you currently do, or assessment. So it's kind of a comment and a question, but I look at it in a practical sense. You're up here and then you have to go out and tell the troops what to do, but education is beyond me, all the variables. So that's my question.
Director Whitfield, I don't think it's beyond you, because we've had lots of really great conversations. I think what we are telling people, is a lot of this is coming from our work with PLCs and Solution Tree. It's our teachers working together is really important. Just like any other profession, you can't be in your office or in your classroom or in your waiting room with doctors and all of that stuff by yourself. So our teachers working together is really key. Having them be very, very clear about what they want students to know and be able to do is the first step that needs to happen. The second is sharing the data. How well are their students doing? Learning from each other about what's working so that they can implement that. And that also goes with assessment. I think there's an assessment literacy that we in education, we definitely all need to continue to do, is when you have that assessment and students did well, what do we do next? When we have that assessment and students didn't do well, what do we do next? So I think I'm answering it. The first is working together is key. We got to make sure that they're collaborating. The second is being very clear about what they want students to know and be able to do. The next step is that assessment and how you respond to that assessment. What do you do in response to the data that you're getting? Did I get there?
I would just say, you know, in the final comment, part of our 3 goals is high expectations. And I really want to have better performance results. It's just my nature to strive for excellence. And I would just charge your team to make it happen. Get to work.
Thank you, Director Whitfield. And I know that that's what we all want. We all really do. And we really do believe that our strategy of working together and narrowing our focus to not just evaluate students, but we're evaluating our work, we're evaluating our practice. By doing that with a smaller group, we're going to get better. And we believe that we're going to reach those outcomes that you and we all expect.
I had one other question. Back when things were normal, we were just starting Eureka. And there was a learning curve. We had changed the math program, for lack of a better word, and the initial stages with the teachers were learning the curriculum and basically changing from Unit A and to this Eureka. How's in Eureka, from my understanding from past meetings, seemed like a very strong and a very effective math method, and one that is across the board. How are we doing with, how are the teachers doing with gaining their confidence and their teaching ability with that?
So I think I'm going to start and then I'm going to pass to Jennifer and Chris if you have something to add. One of the things that happened is we got those 2 new curricula and we were really excited about it. We were very grateful that the board approved the literacy and the math adoptions. We started focusing on the literacy adoption first because we felt that that was where most of our focus was. We were doing both, but most of our focus was on literacy because we know that I think it's like 94 to 96% of the students who don't do well in math also are not doing well in literacy and reading. So we wanted to start with that. We also did more of a minimal rollout of the Eureka. What we just didn't have was time. And our teachers need time. They need time to work together to unpack the lessons and the units. They need time to review the assessments and to talk about what's working and what's not. They need time to just learn all of this. So that's one of the things that we were trying to do as we move forward, is provide them the time to do that.
I'll just add really quick that when, Kim and Chris and I sat down just last week and really talked about what does it mean to relaunch our math for our elementary teachers. We know that it was really hard to teach this math remotely, and that teachers had to come up with a lot of creative solutions to do the best that they could in that kind of environment. And they're also wanting to do the curriculum well. And so we know that there are pockets of excellence happening in our schools. And so it is our goal this year to really get out and learn from those teachers that are doing it well and help them replicate that across our system so that all of our teachers feel confident with the math curriculum that may be new or different to them, especially those that are new to our system.
Yeah, and the pockets of excellence is where my head goes to. We know there are groups of teachers who are really trying to tackle it on their own. They haven't had the time to do it, but they're just diving in and trying to figure it out. And we know groups that have, and they've done a really remarkable job with it. And it's because they're employing the structures that Kim was talking about around PLC. So when they are working together in a small team to try and solve a problem together, that problem in this case is the outcomes for their students with math. This is the curriculum we have. It's new to us. What do we need to do to figure it out? When they're working collaboratively like that, they're much more likely to be successful. And we've seen that success replicated actually throughout the district. But it is really small pockets. And it's on us to make sure that folks have the time they need to sink their teeth into the curriculum in a way that's more intentional. We just haven't had the time. So we're going to get there though.
There was a time in my life when I was in what we called the ELL, instructional coach, back then before we changed our acronyms. But so I love that you are looking at MLL strategies, because when I did that, basically we just called it good teaching, because that's actually what it is. And everybody is a language learner anyway, especially in elementary school and especially before third grade. With your goals, and I'm looking at the last slide of the building of relationships and the practices that support CCDEI, that really does hit our target of our equitable access, part of our mission for our church or for our school. But with the powerful instruction, looking at the ELD strategies and the academic vocabulary, tier 3 vocabulary, sentence stems, language targets, things like that, which carry over to science and math as well, because if you don't understand what the problem's asking you to do, you have no clue what you're even doing anyway. I guess my brain goes to the area of, as a practitioner, what does that look like with the teams? Are we using our Friday afternoon time for PLC so that we can pull out those pockets of excellence and then have that shared across? If Salem Woods is just soaring like it looks like in the data, or do we have several of the third grade teams there that we can get them out to Frylands and Maltby and Frank, or whoever else is struggling in the chain? Or are we, what does that look like? And what strategies are we actually having in place? Maybe this is a question for our next presentation, part 2. This is where my brain goes though. And these are things that I'd love for you guys to bring, if that's where that's going to be. Because when we look at that academic vocabulary, when we look at the sentence stems, and we look at the language targets, rather than just saying we're going to focus on these things, but what does that look like? What is the plan? What is the strategy? And again, this is an open-ended question of saying, these are the answers I would love to see when you guys come and say, what's the game plan? I would love to see that. And what are we having the teachers get on board to do, so that they understand, okay, we're struggling with X. This is how we're solving X. And we're going through these steps because we know that these teachers or this district is doing this and they're having high levels of success with like strands when we disaggregate the data to say this is where they're actually finding that success. One other question I had with that, because that is an open-ended question, I'm not expecting an answer on all of it right this second, is, you know, you said that you mentioned that you're looking at other districts that are doing very well with MLLs, and I know that's common practice as well. But when we looked at the other strands, we're looking at, and this may be a little more difficult, where you're looking at students have special needs students. That is so case by case scenario that I know that that's very hard to do. Or low income schools that are, when you compare those data strands to other districts that are having success in those areas, are we looking in those areas as well, not just MLL?
Yeah.
Okay, that was a question I had also. So
Yeah, I could give you a little primer to
yeah, I
some.
love it.
So the MLL the ELD strategies, English language development strategies, our MLL teachers created an in-house document that outlined which strategies we were going to try out first among the array that are available out there. They documented each strategy on a 8.5 by 11 page with exactly how to roll it out, what it looks like when you do, and the questions to ask yourself if you're doing it right. It comes with a link to videos of our teachers explaining to our teachers what it can look like, what it and how you do it, and then definitions for each of these different strategies. It's a really well-crafted document that they worked really hard on and did just an outstanding job on it. The beginning of the school year, we reintroduced it to the entire school district. Every teacher saw it again, or at least had an opportunity to. And then there's going to be ongoing support throughout the school year to implement those strategies in all of our classrooms. And to your point, it's all of our classrooms. It's in science, it's in music, it's in math, it's everywhere. Because like you said, if it doesn't matter if the kid can't access it, then they're not learning it. And you want to answer anything else?
So what we'll have our leaders and our teachers come and talk with you about the next time is how they've used what was provided to them in terms of the strategies and how to use the strategies. How did they launch the school year? How are they leveraging staff meetings? How are they leveraging their collaborative time? How are they progress monitoring all of this? How are they coaching and supporting teachers as they're trying sometimes new strategies? So as you know, it's a really complicated process, but we have some things in action. I think our next step is to get into buildings with our teacher leaders and our building leaders to really learn alongside with them.
I appreciate that. I think the biggest thing for me with the powerful instruction component is what is the game plan to see what that looks like. And I appreciate you sharing that, and we'll look forward to seeing what that looks like in our next meeting. One other question that comes up with that, with the new change to our MLL assessment of the WIDA test, are we looking at comparative data of the strand of our MLLs within SBA in the ELA section and how they're performing in WIDA and saying, hey, are they comparatively looking alongside? Now, I know it's too early because we've only had one WIDA, but as we're looking, are we saying, are our students doing this together on SBA in the ELA section? And are they doing this in WIDA, or are they both, like, are they comparative?
It's an apples and oranges. And the reason why is because so if you look at all of our WIDA data aggregate, we have our biggest areas of growth are within speaking and writing, neither of which are tested in SBA. So we know, so one of the things we talked about actually with teachers at the start of the school year was the importance of recognizing that just because you think the student in your classroom understood what you just said doesn't mean they're actually able to engage in the learning that you want them to engage in. And one of the reasons why we were really promoting that idea is because it's easy to be fooled that the kid actually knows what's going on and is hanging with you the entire time. All the data we have from WIDA says the same thing. We need to promote more opportunities for students to speak, and we need to promote more opportunities for students to write. If we're able to move those two strands within the WIDA framework, we're going to get much, much better outcomes for our kids.
That's productive language, which is always harder anyway. So appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
Okay, I'm the last one to go. So my question to you is Sky Valley included in this data?
Sky Valley is included for the students who took the assessment at Sky
Okay.
Valley.
What does this look like if you take the Sky Valley data out of it? Because I know at Sky Valley, myself included, I don't teach to this test. I use different curriculum than is used in the regular school buildings, and they don't teach to this test. They have their own methods and ways of going through and progressing children in their learning. So that's why I'm kind of wondering how that affects these results.
I didn't disaggregate it by school for the presentation, and I'd have to go look at it, but I can get back to you on what those numbers are. I think it ties into what Sarah was asking though about what does grade level mean. And I think when we're looking at whether they're going through a parent partnership program or they're going through a traditional general education program, what we want to be able to say is that we want all of our students to experience success with what the state identifies as the core learning standards for that grade level. So whether our students are going through Sky Valley or Leaders in Learning, or they're going through Monroe High School, we want all of our 10th graders to come out being just as competent across all of our school settings. And so although I can appreciate that there might be a different way of teaching at Sky Valley or different emphasis on things, I think it's important for all of our students to come out with the same competencies and to be able to be comparable. Were you able to pull it up?
Add one more thing and then we'll get back to the data. I think we shouldn't have to teach to the test. I believe if we're teaching not just the content, but also skills, kids will do well. If we're teaching kids to really read critically and understand what's being asked, if we ask them to show their steps and explain their thinking, some of that, then our kids are going to do well. That's getting them to talk about what they've learned, how they're going to apply it, and what they're doing that way. It's getting them to write. It's getting them to reflect on their own learning, which I know are things that they're doing at Sky Valley, because Sky Valley, for the past 2 years, their focus has been on student self-assessment. So they're getting kids to think about what they're learning, to write about what they're learning, to assess their own learning. So I think it would be very interesting to look at the data disaggregated with Sky Valley, but I'm hoping that using those skills and teaching those skills throughout our system would eliminate any need to teach to a test.
Well, I'm thinking more even specifically with just math itself. So in the math curriculum that I use, Math UC, there are certain things that would be standard grade level considered on this test that maybe my students haven't gotten to yet because they spend more time building on these other pieces, and then they introduced it at the beginning of 4th grade, kind of a deal. So there are certain things like that where, you know, my kids came back after having taken the test for the first time ever, and they're like, some of the questions on there, we didn't know what they were, but yet as their teacher and their parent, I know exactly what it is that they're learning, and I know how well they are doing in math and how much they're understanding the concepts. So that it's more in that sense. In the language arts sense, there's a lot of writing and a lot of that other stuff. But when it comes to math, depending on the curriculum that you pick, you're going to get different things.
Yeah, and I think that also gets to the grade level standards, where if the curriculum that you're using, if the 3rd grade curriculum is teaching the 3rd grade standards, then that should be aligned. But definitely a longer conversation and a very interesting question.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in really quick too, because it's actually making me think about some conversations that are happening at home, where I've got a 5th grader who is in the Montessori program and has been since kindergarten and is going into 6th grade and is asking me, how do you do regular school? So it's resonating with me, because I feel like what I'm hearing is, regardless of the platform, how we're delivering education to students, grade level means that they have certain skills in place before moving to the next step.
So I just hopped on OSPI's website to look at the data dashboard for Sky Valley, and in 21-22 spring SBA, 28% of the 41 students who participated in the SBA language arts section met standard, and about 19% of the students who did the math met standard. 441. Okay, any other questions?
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you very much.
This is the kind of stuff I got excited about joining the school board. I want to talk numbers, you guys, data. All right, that said, we're going to move on to item 5.01, consideration of resolution 11-22 revolving accounts. The lunchroom change fund has historically been used, attached to resolution 11-22 is the resolution to decrease the lunchroom change fund from $325 to $295. Lunchroom change fund has historically been used to distribute the buildings to do two buildings as a startup cash to allow for making change for students paying cash for meals in our lunchrooms. The $30 reduction is the cash that was being held at Frank Wagner Elementary School. For said purpose, this change fund is no longer necessary since Frank Wagner Elementary became eligible for the community eligibility provision beginning in the school year 22-23 for a period of 4 years with the cycle expiring June 30, 2026. During this time, the participating schools must offer breakfast and lunch at no cost to all students. Is there a motion?
I move that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve business item 5.01, consideration of resolution 11-2022.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion?
I have one question or discussion point. I'm curious about how many other schools have applied for this program and how do we make sure that, or are all schools applying, I guess, is my question. And why would a school apply or not apply?
Brenda? Thanks, Brenda, with the microphone so our online listeners can hear you.
So CEP is based on free and reduced lunch eligibility for this year, which is the first year that it became mandated for all schools that are above a certain level. And both Frank Wagner and Leaders in Learning qualified. And so at both programs, free meals are being provided to all students. For Leaders at the high school and Frank in their lunchrooms. And can buildings apply? We have to meet that certain threshold. So if we got more families to fill out the free and reduced lunch applications, then it's possible that more schools would qualify.
And that opportunity to fill out that information, that form is, am I correct in remembering that that got easier because there was legislation that passed that allowed families to fill that out online?
Yeah, and there's been a change as well. So to Brenda's point, we're now a community eligibility provision district. So the two schools that Brenda referenced are both CEP schools. And as a result of that designation, they no longer have to complete the free and reduced price lunch form, which is a hassle. It's a terrible form. But we still have to have them complete something referred to as a family income survey. But it's a one pager. It takes, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds to complete and sign. Unfortunately, for all of our other buildings, we still need to have our kids, families complete free and reduced price lunch forms. So it's a little bit different. But having said that, it has become considerably easier for our school-wide title program, Frank Wagner, and Leaders in Learning.
Any more comments or discussion on that? Right, there has been a motion and a second. The Monroe School District Board of Directors approve resolution 11-2022. All in favor, raise your hand. Right, motion passes 4-0. Moving on to superintendent consent agenda. Item 6.06. Is there a motion to approve the superintendent consent agenda?
I move the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve all items as listed and presented in the superintendent's consent agenda dated October 10th, 2022.
Second.
Second.
There's a motion and a second that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve all items as listed and presented in the superintendent consent agenda dated October 10th, 2022. All in favor? Raise your hand. Motion passes. And then moving on to item 7.02, is there a motion for the board consent agenda?
Still on. I move that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve all items as listed and presented in the board consent agenda dated October 10th, 2022.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second that the Monroe School District Board of Directors approve all items as listed and presented in the board consent agenda dated October 10th, 2022. All in favor, raise your hand. Motion passes 4-0. Moving on, board reports and comments. Someone want to get that kicked off? Chuck, I know
Okay.
you're going to do the legislative update at the end of there as well. Before we get to that, any other board
Oh,
presentations?
yeah,
Go for it.
I'll comment. Okay, so one of the things I just wanted to comment back on in our superintendent consent agenda, the mental health counseling partnership. I was really pleased to see that on there, our partnership with Take the Next Step. I know that this has been something huge that Sarah has been talking about and advocating for, and it just brought me all the good feels to see it up here on our consent agenda. I'm very excited about that partnership and to see what Take the Next Step can do for the children in our district as far as mental health goes. So there's that. That's the first thing to get out of the way. Okay, second thing, it is Principal Appreciation Month. I got the honor of being the first one to tell Miss Karen Rosenkrantz how much she is appreciated. She is quite the amazing principal. So of course, I just have to talk about her a little bit and how special she is and how much we appreciate her at Sky Valley and everything that she does for our families and our students there and making it such a wonderful place to be. So thank you, Karen. Also, a huge thank you on our human resources report. Margaret Jacobs is retiring here in December. She has been the compliance manager at the front office at Sky Valley for many, many years. She has done an incredible job. She's an incredible human being, and I just want to thank her for all of the hard work that she has done for the students at Sky Valley over the years. The other is that I got the opportunity to go to the volleyball game against Cedar Crest, the home game. It was on September 29th, I think. Fabulous game. The Lady Bearcats were on fire, brought me back to my days doing varsity volleyball at Highline High School. And it was just fabulous. I got the opportunity to share that with two of my boys, and I had a teacher come and sit next to me. I don't think he realized who it was that he was sitting next to, but Nick Wolf, shout out to you. It was absolutely fabulous to sit down with you and have a conversation. He is one of the science teachers up at Monroe High School, and he was there with his 3 daughters. So that was very fun, and it was awesome to get to know him. Yet another wonderful educator that we have here in the district. And then I am super excited to go back and support our Lady Bearcats for volleyball again tomorrow night. Super excited. I think Director Whitfield might join me on that one. And I'm super bummed that I did miss the homecoming game. I was so looking forward to it, but when you've got a sick family, duty calls, and you definitely don't want to spread that around. So, but I'm very excited that it was so good and that the entire week leading up to homecoming was just full of great spirit up at the high school. So we are doing great things and seeing great things, and I love it.
I have a lot to cover, and so I wrote things out and maybe doing some reading here. So I wanted to share with everybody, I got to attend the Maltby Elementary Open House on October 4th. Go Mighty Mustangs. The students provided tours and shared work with their families, and it was still just so great to see people in buildings. I appreciated the factual information displayed about the upcoming levy that was put up in the courtyard, and I've got on my Maltby Mustang gear. I also had the opportunity to attend the 10th annual North Puget Sound Conference on Race, and it was a wonderful opportunity to learn and be in community with folks who are imagining and working to create a better future for everyone. I also wanted to share that today we recognize Indigenous Peoples Day, and I attended a virtual gathering titled intergenerational trauma and Indian boarding schools, excuse me, and was privileged to hear the family story and experiences of Kathy Baylor, a piano teacher in Linwood, who is a member of the Salish Sea chapter of the Washington State Federation of Democratic Women. At these events, people often ask what they can do to bring about restoration and healing, and I have heard two suggestions in the last week or so. The first is working with your communities and representatives to advance bills HR 5444 and S 2907 that seek to establish the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act. And the second is supporting the Tulalip Foundation Youth Advisory Council. I believe MSD has an opportunity to consider what we as an organization can do as well. There's been discussion about a land acknowledgement, and I'd like to see us move forward with one, especially since MSD backs up that acknowledgement with action, including our involvement in the Skykomish Valley Indian Education Consortium. I have two, and I'm going to make it 3 asks for upcoming meetings. In March, the board addressed our policies regarding facilities use and fees. Shortly after, I engaged in a district meeting and separately a meeting with the Sky Valley Little League Board. The decision made by our board was written to be temporary, and there was discussion about putting together a community group to consider policy and procedure so the board could receive additional input and take further action, but this has not yet happened. With a new director of facilities and more sports seasons underway with continued questions and concerns, I would like to see MSD and the board engage in additional work toward resolving these matters. And in workshops, this board has discussed public comment and our norms for communication. Recently, we established how we will respond to folks who make public comment, and I would like us to consider further the statement that we read before public comments and our indication that we are not accountable for comments made in this room that violate the school district's policies. I find this to be out of alignment with our high expectations for the rest of the district. And I would like the board to consider how we can better model commitment to policy and constructive public discourse. Maybe when responding to public commenters, we can inform them of policies they violated to help with community education. Perhaps for folks who continually violate the same policies, the board should have some recourse. I'm not sure about how to proceed, but I know I am not comfortable asking our staff and students to make commitments that we won't, and I would like us to work together to do better. The third one that I'll add is if we could just have a review of how to make comments on superintendent and board consent agenda items, because I also wanted to express appreciation for the community partnership and collaboration to support mental health for our students between MSD and Take the Next Step. As somebody who refers clients for behavioral and mental health services, I know how hard it is right now. And so I appreciate the work that folks are doing. Thank you.
Chuck, did you want to move on to your section? Or did you have your regular comments before we move on to that section?
So went to homecoming on Friday, my grandkids. We just smoked them. It was kind of got boring after the 10th touchdown. But one thing I look at is just the entirety of the game. All the volunteers who were serving food, the volunteer teachers, all the coaches and the parents. The band was terrific during halftime. And Victor, I always look at the grounds to make sure that nothing's torn and needs fixed. We have an awesome football field and track. I mean, it's incredible. And then I think about when everybody starts stomping their feet, you know, the bleacher's going to hold up under that, and we got liability related to the things collapsing, but I'm sure it's built to good structural specifications. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm probably going to butcher, but ich war deres Wochen auf dem Oktoberfest. Ich war mit meiner Frau und mein Sohn dort. Es hat mein viel geschmeckt. Alles in Deutschland stanzeriert war ich das unsere Oktoberfest und München. Es war ein unglaublich, I'm going to skip it. I did a Google Translate. I went to Oktoberfest this weekend, one that they have in Puyallup, and I went to the Oktoberfest in Munich many years ago, and they have like 6 million people attended. Kim and I had talked about the importance of students traveling to get out to other countries. People, there's places outside of the United States and Monroe, a lot of things going on in the world. So I don't know what we have for international education or global pursuits. But I think that in the world we're in, there's a lot of great places to, to serve an international society. So Oktoberfest was great though. Gut essen und trinken.
Before you get into the WASA legislative, I wanted to share something as well. Sarah, you read my brain. Had a great time with Dr. Larson and her team. We had a levy presentation, got to do some of that in Spanish, and had a conversation with an individual parent whose son is also on the same football team with my son, and they go to the same middle school, and they're in the same grade, and about youth sports as well. And the exact same thing is we started that conversation, and I talked to him at the middle school football game as well, which varsity's undefeated. Just saying, Monroe Middle School football. Oh my gosh, you guys. But talked to him at the game as well, and we need to continue that conversation. So Victor, I'd love to see, now that we have that position filled, what that looks like for our community partnerships, which that was a promise, I know, of the bonds and our fields, and our community partnerships are an absolute priority. So if we can get that on a board meeting in the future, that would be wonderful as well, to have that conversation and iron that out, because their seasons are underway and we need to redefine what that looks like. So yeah, I'm completely behind on that one as well, which I'm excited about, but excited to see us continuing. It feels like our school year is just off to a great start, which feels so good, you guys. And I'm just really excited. I also wanted to say I got to go to the Hidden River and the Chain Lake open houses. Phenomenal jobs, great teachers. I'm excited to start getting into classrooms this month, and just want to do a shout out about my kids' principals as well. Anna Apter, who is doing a great job at Chain Lake, and John Judy, who is at Hidden River. Just really appreciate what they're doing, and I get a front and center view because my kids are at those schools. I know you guys as well at your kids' schools. Really appreciate what they're doing. I think we have great staff in our buildings, and we have great administrators, and so appreciative of them, and so really excited to see us continue that moving forward. Chuck, you want to take us home on 8.02? Was the legislative update?
Save all the exciting stuff.
Yeah,
to the end.
you get to bring us home with the excitement.
Well, first I want to tell the board, when I was in my office a while ago and I had that snafu with my my Bluetooth, my headset, trying to get the settings on the computer correct. You guys had a good laugh. I appreciated that. Well, you would have been proud of me. I had my laptop that was running the meeting live. I had my two other screens, one that had the current proposed not legislation, but amendments. And then I was reading forward on additional items that were to come up. It's a lot different than what I thought. So it was like 8 hours going through this, and we were flying. So it was actually resolutions that were passed changing current policy, and then recommendations for additional legislative positions. There were just, I don't even know how to cover it. There were so many different types of legislation recommendations. What I did is, of the 70 that we went through, I met with Dr. Larson And we just looked at making recommendations based on those. The ones, I don't even know how to go through all this stuff with, I reviewed the information in advance and then I put down what I was going to vote for or go against. And then we went through those and my mind was changed on some because there was open discussion. And I was reading them. And of the 70, they were, I would say they were reasonable and that they were finely tuned. Washington School Directors Association. I think they have a good representation of the school. One of the things that I didn't like was that individual districts could vote for items and they would pass, but there's a thing called a weighted vote. And it could be overturned by schools that have a different voting. So like a school like Tacoma or like Seattle or larger school districts could weigh in and they had more of a weighted vote to them. And so there was ones that I read, we discussed and we approved, and then they had a weighted vote and they just overturned it. And nothing we could do. I didn't even know what it was until, about a third of the way in, because I was looking at the bylaws, trying to find information. But of the ones that we chose, those are the ones that were not, as Sarah and I discussed, the 10 legislative positions they put forth were out of 110 choices from the list and having hyperlinks to each one. So Dr. Larson and I just decided to make recommendations, or we developed a list of 15 based on the ones that we discussed and that were the most relevant. So that's my report. Nothing substantive. Questions? I know you have some, Sarah. Oops.
I just want to hear more about the 8 hours. Like what did you do during that time? And then I guess I have a question about, we have this list of 15. And so what is going to be done with those? Are we indicating our responses and then is that public record? Like how is all of that working? And I appreciate that you went, Chuck. Thank you. And brought us back a report.
What it was like was just mind blowing. We had like a 20-minute lunch. We flew through items so fast. And I learned, it was interesting listening to the way people directed their input. A lot of the individuals had their statements written out in advance. And it was interesting listening from little school districts and then listening to ones from larger school districts. And it was valuable more from that standpoint, just learning the way they gave their suggestions and the way they articulated things. What was your second part of the question?
The second part was just about our the list that you
Oh,
provided
yes.
to us and how we're going to move
Yes.
through that.
So once we finished, you got that email, I believe you all got, that was put your 10 top priorities from the district. And then looking at it, we had that 110 positions. And so what we did is we picked out 15, and from that, I guess it'll be, so why don't you cover that?
You want me to chime in? First, I have to preface it with, some years back, I attended this General Assembly meeting with my board member that was the legislative rep, and I never went back again. It's a long, and I believe when it was in person, it was 2 days. It's a lot. You're right. It moves right along and seems to go on forever. But so kudos to Chuck for hanging in there, especially doing that online. Our hope was to save you some time so that each of you individually did not have to go through the 100+ options. So we tried to narrow it down to try to narrow down the choices. I don't believe it was our intention to say you cannot choose a different priority that isn't on that list. We are leaving that open, but just trying to get guidance since Chuck has to give the input by the 12th at 5 p.m. So the time frame is pretty short. So he's our spokesperson, of course, and is going to have to narrow down to 10, hopefully based on some feedback from you. Of course, we're just one of 295 school boards. So there'll be a lot of other people weighing in. Is that helpful? Does that help?
I have a question on this as well. So with this, the chart, and Holly sent us an email with all of the information as well. Are we selecting just what we want to focus on? Or are we selecting where our board falls on certain issues, or how we see that? Just what we want to focus on? Okay. So we just kind of put an X next to 10 of the 15 that we're kind of saying, these are areas that these are valuable to me or to us.
And what it isn't necessarily what we will focus on in Monroe School District. It is for the state focus.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Monroe School District feels that these are important for WASDA to really spend extra time on. That's what we're actually saying. I want to make sure that was clear. Thank you, Chad.
And I think they are really interesting to go through all of them for folks who nerd out over it. So I did review all of them and came up with a separate list that I've emailed to Chuck of what I thought was important. So if you have the time, I don't know, I think it's worth looking at all of them, and it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see them. It's interesting to think about how legislation that impacts our schools gets started and moves through a process, and that we have this additional capacity to influence that, being on the board and having Chuck as our representative. So I think it's worth looking at them all. That's me.
I was in the same boat, because for me, I'm sitting here going, I think that with everything that we've been through in the last couple of years, and us being a relatively young board, it feels like you're just on the receiving end of everything. But now you actually get to be on the productive end of saying, hey, these are priorities. We want to see this move forward, rather than we're just getting what the state is telling us to do, which it gets kind of old after a while, because you're like, the state that shouldn't be telling me how to run my local school district, like, or us, like, this is, so this is where we get to be on that end. So that's exciting. Any other questions, comments? Okay, that said, it is 6:17, you guys, 6:17. The sun is still out barely. And this meeting is adjourned.